what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 16th, 2016, getting through the month here, coming up on Christmas, coming up on the Electoral College on Monday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Today is the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, which is when the American patriots, angered at being forced to only buy tea from the British East India Company, boarded ships in Boston Harbor and threw a shipment of tea into the harbor as a form of protest. So, it was a good thing to do here because that enforced dependency is a form of slavery. And that was how the British Empire looted all of its possessions and colonies and so forth, and they were doing it to the U.S. here. Now then, getting on to more recent examples of tyranny, Obama is on TV. He's been talking, his last speech of the year before he comes on out here to Hawaii to drive our traffic patterns absolutely crazy with all the motorcades. And basically, the overall impression of this, I mean, he's sort of relaxing and having fun now, talking, responding to the media, but during the opening part of the speech, the look on his face was kind of one of, all right, let's get this over with. And mostly, I would say this speech is all about trying to resell the current policies and agenda to the American people in the hope that they will somehow resist changes Donald Trump is going to bring in terms of our relationships with Syria and Russia and so forth. Now, Obama made a couple of interesting comments about the hacking. And this is very, very significant. First of all, after all this tough talk about how we will respond to Russia's hacking of the election, Obama came on out and said the response to the Russians won't be public, meaning, as far as we're concerned, we're not going to see anything happen. And he says, we're not going to do something that's going to give us problems. And Obama declared it an absolute fact that the the Russians hacked the DNC emails and said, we're just trying to let people know we're not out here trying to overturn the election or anything. The media is interpreting things themselves. And basically added that no questions have been raised about the integrity of the actual elections themselves. Now, that is very significant. First of all, we know from what's going on in Michigan where they're finding all this pro-Hillary election fraud, this election had serious integrity issues. But they don't want to go there because it's so dangerous. We've already got 3 states screaming that the Department of Homeland Security was trying to hack their voter databases. So Obama is out there saying our election system is secure and the Russians had nothing to do with it. And, of course, that throws Hillary under the bus in terms of her trying to convince the Electoral College to vote for her because Russia rigged the election. And so Obama's basically, he just blinked. And the Hillary campaign is now out there. Their talking point is, well, maybe the election itself was okay, but if it hadn't been for the Russians exposing the DNC emails and the FBI's investigation of the email server, Hillary would have won the election. And this is classic liberalologist thinking, because had Hillary Clinton and her people and the DNC been playing by the rules, there would have been nothing for whoever it was who leaked those DNC emails to leak, and there wouldn't have been anything for the FBI to investigate. But this is classic liberalologist thinking. We're serving a higher purpose. We're supposed to break the law and break the rules. We're allowed to do that because we're liberalologists, and the blame is all on those of you who just make a big fuss about such little tiny things like Benghazi. You were all supposed to forget about that. Now, Hillary's upped the ante on this whole Russia hacking. Putin personally supervised it on his own personal Windows 10 laptop. She's now saying that Vladimir Putin has a personal grievance against Hillary. And that was the only reason he broke into the elections and and undermined our democracy and wants Americans to doubt the election system because that's part of a Russian plot. That's the new thing. It's a Russian plot to get people to question whether or not our elections are honest, fair, and accurate. So I guess Bev Harris is part of the Russian intelligence operation right now, along with all of us in the independent media. At the rate they're going to wind up with 330 million Russian allies in this country, as opposed to the 400, 500 sore losers and crybabies that are out there in Washington, D.C. Let's see. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Ed in Florida. Ed, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ed, are you there? Yes.
Oh, okay, great. There must be something wrong with the phone.
Okay.
How do you think this is going to play, Mike? How do you think this is going to play out, Mike, in the end?
How is which going to play out in the end? I mean, there's so many different things going on.
Do you think they'll steal the election from Trump?
I don't think they can. I think that has obviously fallen apart. I mean, the GOP leadership is talking to the electors. Associated Press is talking to the electors. They're all standing firm on their historic traditional duty. If anything, this campaign of intimidation and threats has angered them greatly. So, yes, I think in point of fact, the Electoral College is going to validate Donald Trump's presidency. The only way right now that is left for Hillary to still get that White House is if something happens to Donald Trump before Monday morning. And that's why I wish he would stay home this weekend. I know he's out on his thank you tour and everything, but I really wish he would stay at home because right now, Hillary and the people behind her, the people who are so afraid that Donald Trump is going to wreck their little war and banking games, they're desperate enough to do something like that. And it's a real risk. And, you know, I don't want to see it happen, obviously. But that right now is about the last thing that Hillary can really do. Now, Claire was making the observation that once the Electoral College votes and it all moves forward, that Hillary could somehow go to the Supreme Court and cry wolf. But I really don't see how they could do that. And looking at Hillary's face when she showed up for the thank you party for all of her billionaire donors, she didn't look like somebody who was still in the fight. I think we're through this crisis. Again, barring an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Before you continue, hang on a second. I want to take hang on. I'll be right with you. I just want to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. And now, go ahead, Ed, and tell us what you were going to say.
I'm sorry, Mike. I'm getting kind of like an echo, so I don't know whether it's my phone line or whatever. But my question is, how is this different from the 2000 elections?
Well, the major difference was that the 2000 race was incredibly close, and it all came down to Florida and the rules for counting and dangling chads, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gave the presidency to George W. Bush, and then oddly enough, at the bottom of their decision, they added the observation that Supreme Court ruling could not be ever cited in any future cases, which tells you, that something underhanded was going on. The problem is, what is Hillary going to say to the Supreme Court? It's not like it was a close race that came down to one state. Trump won in a landslide on the electoral college vote, which is how the game is supposed to be played. Hillary's people are still trying to claim that she won the popular vote, but as more and more evidence of election fraud in Michigan and Wisconsin surface, all these dead voters and illegal immigrants and everything, at this point I would have to say that probably a huge chunk of Hillary's votes were all fraudulent. And that's why Obama's backing off, saying that the Russians hacked the presidential election, because he dares not allow a real investigation to go in there.
That's what I thought, and I don't understand why Hillary would push for a vote recount, knowing that she has so many millions of fraudulent voters, dead and alive, voting for her.
She was rolling the dice. And I think that was why she put Jill Stein out there at the front to keep the focus off of Hillary, because if it had been Hillary behind the recounts, then more attention would have been focused on the indications of election fraud. Personally, I think Trump ought to order an investigation into this election once he's in the White House, because that question about having an honest, accurate election system is very much unanswered, despite Obama's protestations on the TV this morning. And even last October, when Trump first brought up the possibility that our elections are less than 100% honest, you remember how all the liberals jumped all over him and said, that's ridiculous to suggest our elections can be impacted in any way. It's distributed, it's secure, it's on computers, it couldn't possibly happen. And we know precisely the opposite, that our current election system is designed to facilitate election theft and concealment of same. And we have to demand a complete redo of our election system in the next 2 years, and that's going to be a necessary first step to rebuilding America's image around the world, because right now the rest of the world has been laughing their heads off at the sheer childishness of the aftermath of the election and the obvious fraud both in the primaries and the general election itself.
Thank you very much, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go here. And moving right along, the corporate media is still out there saying that Russia did hack the U.S. presidential election, even though Obama just said, no, that can't be done. Our election system is secure. Don't look inside the boxes. Don't look at the computer code. Just take our word for it. The election system is honest, and Russia didn't hack it. And as always, the media is citing unnamed U.S. officials. And you need to remember, unnamed U.S. officials told us Saddam had nuclear weapons. Unnamed U.S. officials told us in 2000 snow was a thing of the past. Unnamed U.S. officials told us the Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. The U.S. government has told us so many lies throughout the years, aided and abetted by the corporate media. Why would anybody believe them now about the Russians hacking our election? Because the FBI, NSA, and the Director of National Intelligence have all rejected the CIA's claim, based on a single anonymous source, that Russia tinkered with the actual election. And as I said, Obama's backed off of that one. I imagine they're looking at the comments on blogs all over America. They're looking at the Twitter traffic and realizing people just aren't buying the bovine excrement anymore. Alrighty, so moving right along here, and I'm glad they backed off on the election issue and how the response is going to be private or out of the public eye, because a few years ago, the Obama administration adopted as a policy that a cyber attack would be treated as an outright act of war justifying military response. I didn't think Obama was going to be stupid enough to do that. But he is out there talking about, we've got to have troops on the ground in Syria. The Syria situation is deteriorating. Assad is barbecuing and eating his own people now, and he's not using GMO sauce. So we've got to go in there and basically trying to ramp up the war and conflict. But like I said, it's not like he's going to order the war himself in his remaining few weeks in office. It's like a post-presidential campaign speech to resell the policies and agendas to you, the American people, in the hope that you will then in turn resist the changes that Trump wants to make. I don't think it's going to work, but they're not going to stop. And we found this wonderful video from last October, only last October, when Trump was saying there is a question, based on what we saw during the primaries, there's a question about the honesty and accuracy of America's election system, and Obama came on out and said to Trump, oh, stop whining about rigged elections. I mean, what a completely ludicrous idea to suggest our election system is anything but 100% honest. And I imagine that's going to cause a lot of gritting of teeth on Air Force One, along with that video where Obama had his cell phone and was responding to Trump's tweet that Obama was going to go down as the worst president in history, and Obama said, well, at least I'm going to go down in history as a president. Yuck, 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 yuck. He's not laughing now, of course, here. Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that this idea that Russia hacked the election system was bogus from day one because none of the electronic voting machines or the tabulators or any of that stuff are actually on the Internet. The people who rig the elections have to be there on the ground, in the precincts, in the tabulation centers. In other words, the election workers, the poll workers themselves, are the ones doing the hacking. And I don't think they're all working for Russia. Most of them were working for Hillary Clinton. Now, Julian Assange has gone on the offensive. He's going on out there and getting as much attention as he can, saying that no, in point of fact, Russia had nothing to do with the leak of the DNC emails, that it was a leak, not a hack, and it came from an insider, quite possibly Seth Rich, who was murdered at about that same time. The police said, oh, it was a robbery, even though whoever shot him and killed him did not take the wallet or the watch or the cell phone. And we had quite a few people close to the Clinton political machine. I think 5 altogether died under suspicious circumstances during that period. A lot of dead bodies around the Clintons here. Now, FBI Director Comey is reasserting again the Russians did not influence the election. And James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, is in agreement. Loretta Lynch is out there saying the Department of Justice has found no evidence of any of this stuff. You're starting to see the government turn against the Hillary machine. They've been scared of her. They've been scared of the narcocracy for 30 years, and all of a sudden, like the rest of us, they're seeing the light breaking through the clouds that we might actually be able to break free of these criminals. You can almost feel the excitement there. All right, we're going to take a phone call real quick before the commercial break. Errol in the Netherlands, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick. I think those whole fake news, what they are trying to pull on us, you know, it's advertising. I will say it's advertising for the
independent media. I mean, yeah, after the Washington Post.
No, not the independent media. Exactly. So I'm now watching those websites, and I'm like those websites saying, oh, that is fake news. What was that? Doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm watching these news clips, and I think by myself, what have you done to yourself? You have promoted the independent news media. So the independent news media has more power now than they thought that they could crush. So this is so beautiful to see, Mike. I'm just laughing my beep off.
Yeah.
Because this is so beautiful to see. Stupidity, maybe, but I think, man, how can you make such things up? And 1 + 1 makes 2. Okay, but when you say first, we're going to do this, we're going to crush them, and then after that, you're going to put some, how do you call it? Visionaries in them, like Snoops or ABC or BBC or MSNBC, to control or to read the fake news. And I see the list, I think by myself, what did you do to yourself? You know?
Well,
it's perfect. It's perfect.
The corporate media, going back decades, was co-opted by the government and corporations to become a propaganda ministry, and they were very well paid to do that. And so that's what they've been doing, and now everybody knows that's exactly what they are, and they're having a knee-jerk panic response to it, and things could get very ugly between the corporate media and the independent media, but in the end, just as it was in Gutenberg's time, you cannot stop the march of progress. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, Errol, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I think one of the reasons that this whole Russia hacking thing failed to gain any traction was the utter hypocrisy behind it all. First of all, the United States has been interfering in other countries' elections, either rigging their elections or simply murdering the people they didn't want to run for office for decades. And here you have the United States in high dudgeon, how dare the Russians hack the DNC emails or whatever. Remember when the U.S. and Israel unleashed Stuxnet on the Iranians, and then it broke into the wild, and in addition to wrecking the Iranians' power station infrastructure, it went out and it destroyed a lot of other industrial facilities using those same Siemens controllers, possibly even the Fukushima power plant itself, because their emergency systems, which use those same Siemens controllers, failed to operate correctly in the aftermath of the quake and tsunami. And it was known Stuxnet was in computers around Fukushima at the time. And of course, the U.S. government, in complete violation of the Fourth Amendment, has been hacking into all the computers of the American people, plus computers belonging to people all around the world. And it's not about crime, it's not about terror, it's about stealing business secrets. It's about finding blackmail information. And so it is utter hypocrisy for Obama to get up there and say, how dare the Russians break into the DNC emails, especially because there's no evidence Russia did it, and the people who are in a position to know are saying, no, it was a leak by an insider. Now, interestingly enough, ever since Trump won the election, they've been polling the public's view of Russia itself, trying to see if all this anti-Russia propaganda is taking hold, and it isn't. Trump voters are showing an increasingly favorable view of Russia. So this attempt to get a new world war going, a new Cold War or hot war, is in serious, serious trouble. Now, Tucker Carlson had a California Democrat, Eric Stallwell, on the show. And Stallwell is out there pushing the party line about, Russia hacked the elections. We've got 17 intelligence agencies that are all in absolute agreement that Russia did this. And Tucker Carlson put him on the spot and said, which 17 agencies? And Tucker Carlson said he hadn't seen any official statements from any intelligence agencies. And by the way, the heads of most of those agencies that were claimed to be on the list of 17 have said, we never said any such thing. You're just making it up. And then Eric backtracks, tries to get away from the fact that he can't actually name an intelligence agency outside the CIA that's pushing this hacker narrative. And he backtracks and he says the issue is that Russia had a preferred candidate in the U.S. election. Well, I mean, come on, think about it. Every head of every nation on earth is looking at the elections in other nations and deciding which candidate would be better for their own nation's good. That's part of the job. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is falling apart. The wheels have come off this one. Now, again on Tucker Carlson's show, Newsweek senior writer Kurt Eichenwald went on screaming about how Donald Trump was in a mental hospital in 1990. And, of course, Carlson said, is there any documentation to back that up? And Eichenwald said, well, I have it on good authority. I was told this. He was at a mental hospital in 1990. Remember that Politico writer came on out trying to claim that Trump was having sex with his daughter Ivanka? I mean, they're just out there screaming anything they think might have the slimmest possible chance of convincing the GOP electors to defect, and it's not going to happen. It is not going to happen at all. Now, Tommy Lahren has a video. We posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. She goes on a rant about the Democrats' blame game, and it is worth watching because she just absolutely nails it. Russia didn't make Hillary set up that private server. Russia didn't make the DNC rig the primaries for Bernie Sanders. Hillary and the DNC made those choices themselves. And blaming the messenger doesn't change that reality. We've got to take a break for commercials. Got some phone calls to play when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at all this Russia bashing that's going on in the corporate media. And do you remember, I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. Back in 2012, Mitt Romney tried to play that Russia card about the threat Russia posed, and Obama and all the liberals were saying, oh, come on, I mean, the Cold War's been over for 20 years. Russia's not a threat. And it's because of things like that that governments in other countries have come to the conclusion, and some have actually stated this out loud. It is impossible to tell what's really going on inside the U.S. from anything the American politicians or the American corporate media say, because it's just constantly changing back and forth to whatever they think is going to work in the moment. All right, we're going to take some phone calls. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to disagree with you again.
Oh, about what?
Well, the mainstream media, I think what's happening is, just like sharks, they can smell blood in the water and are gathering slowly to go after these neocons and the Clintons in particular. So it's looking like the whole system is collapsing around. And as
well,
far as
it may be less than sharks in the water than the corporate media realizing an opportunity to salvage their reputation with the American people. And I don't have a problem with that as a motive. If they're all of a sudden going to realize that they're going to have to start being more honest about what's going on, that's sort of been the whole purpose of the independent media, to get the corporate media to go back to doing the job they're supposed to do, watchdog on government abuse. And, hey, good for you. Go do it. If the corporate media is going to do their job properly, then I'm going to quit doing all this and be Claire's roadie for the rest of my life.
As I was saying a couple of weeks ago, I believe that this DNC nonsense was all leaked.
Yes.
I was watching RT, and Ray McGovern, who's been a very good friend of this British ambassador for years, they were in a park somewhere expecting to have a party. And according to Mr. Govan, the ambassador quietly slipped away and slipped his FBI minders.
Yes.
He said, he disappeared over the hill and never appeared at the party. He obviously, like McGovern said, he obviously had something more important to do. And we now find that the ambassador is also a great friend of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange.
Yes.
And the thing is...
Craig Murray.
Murray, yes. And the thing is, as far as WikiLeaks goes, they've got a 100% record of accuracy. Now, whether that's a plus or a burden on them, I don't know. But the latest Hannity interview with Assange showed him to be an equal opportunities, if you like, destroyer of politicians. It doesn't matter which side you're on.
Well, that's always been my policy, for the 22 years that I've been doing this. I go after, I go after the politicians who are behaving badly, whether they're in this country or other countries, and that's the way to be. If you're being an objective reporter about what's going on, you report on wrongdoing regardless of who's doing it.
And as far as these latest statements from various people, Obama and John Kerry, if I was awarding prizes from 1 to 10, I would give Obama 6 Pinocchios and John Kerry 9.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they're obviously lying through their teeth.
Of course they are. Of course they are. We know that they're lying through their teeth because their mouth is moving and words are coming out.
And they're just disgracing America. I mean,
yes.
The notable on that RT was, the 3 guests were quite critical. But, I mean, the guy was laughing. He's just laughing at America. And that's how people are in Europe now. They're laughing at America. And you wouldn't believe how they treat Americans now. They think they're all stupid.
Well, sometimes Americans bring that on themselves. I remember when I was working in Germany back in the 1980s, and, I had made the effort to learn enough German to where it was obvious I cared about it, and we got along famously. But I remember one time we were out at Erin Kimsey, and there was a travel group from Texas who frankly did not put on a display that I thought was conducive to warm relations between the Americans and the Germans. So, but yeah, I think a lot of people around the world see that Americans are stupid by design of the government. And I remember when I was working down in Australia, and we were talking politics, and I was telling them all that was going on with Vince Foster and everything, and they sort of paid me a left-handed compliment. They said, "Wow, you're really well informed about what's going on for an American." So, and I know they meant it as a compliment, but it was kind of interesting. They weren't expecting this kind of insightful analysis, and for one of those bloody Yanks come down here and think they know what's going on.
Well, yeah, I mean that is a classic backhanded compliment.
All right. Anything else, John, or can I let you go?
Well, I think this narrative about the massacre that the soldiers are perpetrating in Aleppo is just, John Kerry must have lost his mind, because we've got so much information coming out and so many videos and independent sources which show entirely the opposite.
You know what I think is going on, and I saw this in Obama's face when he started his speech this morning. I think they understand they've already lost all the Americans who are getting their information from here in the independent media, and right now all they can do is play to the audience that is still dependent on the corporate media, and that's a minority of the American people right now, but that's about all that they can do, along with screaming, please don't look at those websites because we need to be able to lie to you or we can't run the country.
Anyway, you can slap my hand, because I was wrong yesterday when I said that Syrian people were taking pot shots at the evacuated Takfiris and terrorists. In actual fact, according to what I'm learning now, it was other terrorists that were actually taking pot shots. So taking pot shots was accurate, but I just got the wrong source.
Well, it's easy to, and you consider your hand slapped. It's easy to make a mistake because everybody's telling a different story. What we're getting from Syria and Russia is the people of Aleppo are just happy as all get out. It looks like that's over, although apparently the U.S.-backed rebels that are still holed up in a couple of isolated spots are firing at the civilian evacuation convoys. Here in the U.S., of course, they're saying, well, we actually know it's pro-government Assad forces because Assad is going to kill everybody in Aleppo, so they can't tell the world what he's been doing. And the lies just get more grandiose until, they've jumped the shark is basically what they've done on this thing. And people around the world and in the United States have that irresistible gravity attraction between the palm of their hand and their forehead, and they're going, bang, come on already.
Okay, Michael, thanks for having me on again.
All right, thank you. And we're going to switch over to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, Michael.
Aloha, aloha, nui nui. Melikalikimaka.
Okay, back at you both.
Okay. You know what that last one is, right?
What?
The last one. Melikalikimaka is Hawaiian for Merry Christmas.
Oh, okay.
Now that it's politically correct to say Merry Christmas again, yes.
There you go. Anyway, this is going to seem rather simplistic in train of thought, so you have to bear with me for a moment.
Okay.
But in all this thing about who rigged this and who rigged that and so forth, since the election has occurred or not occurred or whatever the case might be, depending on who you get from where, ad nauseum, what I find ironic and almost hypocritical, let alone some other choice words I could use, but won't, if the everyday person does not acknowledge the aspect that your everyday election is rigged from the get-go here in the U.S., then what would possibly make them believe that someplace like Russia would go and rig the election itself? I'm trying to wrap my head around with duct tape, trying to figure out, okay, if you don't believe that there are...
No, you're not supposed to try and figure this out. You're just supposed to hear what Obama and the corporate media say and just believe. Don't think. Don't analyze. Don't try and figure it out. You must be an arm of Russian intelligence if you're actually thinking about what they're saying. And,
I'm not that kind of a woman. So.
No, well, okay. I got to make up a coffee cup, official arm of Russian intelligence.
Oh, wait a minute. How many arms are you going to put on the mug?
Just one. It's going to be kind of wimpy and flaccid, but, I'll use my own arm as a model.
Never mind.
Okay.
Never mind. Anyway, y'all have a great weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to get back to some news here. Representative King is out there ever since the CIA refused a request to show proof of Russian hacking to the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, is out there basically saying, as far as they can tell, their only possible conclusion is the CIA is running a disinformation campaign against Donald Trump. Yeah, I think so. Now, there's an interesting article over in Washington's blog, Should We Blindly Trust the CIA on its claims about the Democratic emails? And I read that headline, and my first response is this a trick question? And then the article goes on in to remind everybody about the long history of the CIA, that it is constantly lying, that it is constantly playing dirty tricks, it's killing people, it's overthrowing governments, it's engaging in torture. And they go back about all the leading officials in our government who throughout history have been cautioning we should not allow an intelligence agency to have this much power and autonomy. And in his memoir, President at the Creation, Harry Truman's Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, said, I had the gravest forebodings. And Acheson warned Truman that as set up, neither the President, the National Security Council, or anyone else was in a position to know what the CIA was doing or to control it. And, of course, we all remember that Bay of Pigs fiasco, where the CIA lied to Kennedy, tried to box him into supporting this invasion of Cuba. It went horribly wrong. Following that, of course, John F. Kennedy expressed his desire to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And he, in fact, issued an executive order that transferred authority for covert operations from the CIA back to the military, but it was never carried out because John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA that Kennedy had fired for the Bay of Pigs, somehow managed to be on that Warren Commission covering up the assassination. See how it all works here. Now, NSA whistleblower Bill Binney, who's been out there for quite a long time, is saying basically one of the agendas behind all of this, Russia is hacking us, Russia's a threat, is the defense contractors are trying to bring back the Cold War because it's a sweet deal. They get to plunder and loot the American taxpayer to build all this kind of stuff, and it doesn't really have to work because there's never actually going to be a hot war. It's just the U.S. military-industrial complex builds these very expensive scarecrows, and then Russia builds more impressive scarecrows, and then we come back and build an even bigger and scarier scarecrow, and the people are made to pay for it all. And they're trying to get back to that. When the Soviet Union fell, the American people started talking about, we need a peace dividend. We have been stripped bare funding all this military stuff. Our big enemy that we were all told justified all this is now gone. Can we spend more of the American taxpayers' money on the American people? And, of course, the response was, oh, no, we can't do that. We have to give money to Israel, and we have to have a war on terror and a war on poverty, and we've got to fight human-caused global warming. No, it would be a sin for us to let the taxpayers have their own tax money back. We know where it's best to be spent. So, anyway. Now, we are still getting reports of the electors being harassed and threatened, that bad things will happen to them. If they vote for Donald Trump, Hillary's people will shoot a kitten or something like that, I'm not sure. And it has been a massive campaign, something like, some of these electors are getting $50,000 emails. I'll bet you most of them are being generated by software, not by real people. And this one elector, Sharon Geiss, is saying her solution for that is mass delete. And what a shame that mass delete doesn't actually work on all these thugs who are threatening, all these brown shirts who are out there playing these Hitler-esque games to try and gain power. Up in Alaska, just to show you how ridiculous this is getting, a Hillary Clinton supporter has sued Alaska's 3 Electoral College voters on the grounds that their vote violates her Fifth Amendment right of equal protection and denies her the principle of one person, one vote. No, she's one person. She got one vote. And not too surprisingly, the state of Alaska is asking the courts to throw this out in a fit of laughter. Now, as I mentioned before, Associated Press has interviewed over 330 electors, and they say they are not voting for Hillary Clinton. And they're also saying the same thing. We're getting stacks of letters from idiots who are out there saying, vote for Hillary, or I will make rude noises in your direction here. And again, what is the portrait of a faithless elector? We have this Christopher Suprin down in Texas, and the media made him a star. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, I'm a Trump elector, but I can't bring myself to vote for him. And it turns out this guy is a crook and a loser, married 3 kids, had a membership at Ashley Madison before they realized it was all a hoax, and people weren't really getting affairs through that. He's in bankruptcy. He's linked in with a questionable 9/11 charity and a payday loan scam. And now it turns out part of his fame is he claimed he was a first responder on 9/11. And he wrote a story about what a hero he was, and it turned out the fire station he claimed to be part of was not deployed on 9/11, and he did not join the fire department until 1 month after 9/11 happened. The guy is a flake, and that is a perfect model for all the faithless electors. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And that was actually an ironic piece of bump music because Fox News is running a story about new details about this CIA memo. Remember, it was a secret report. Now it's a memo. It's shrunk. It's down to a memo. Next, it'll be a Post-it note. And basically, the entire content of this memo is there is a strong consensus that Russia hacked the DNC emails. Now, consensus isn't science, as the global warming people have demonstrated to us. Consensus is they got a bunch of people together and said, do you think the Russians hacked the DNC emails? And they all said, could be, yeah. That's it. They're basically now admitting they don't actually have any factual evidence. No wonder they canceled the appearance before the House Intelligence Committee. They couldn't show up with the evidence because there wasn't any. So that's it. Basically, the CIA got a memo together where they got some people together to say, yeah, maybe, could be, can't rule it out. That's the entire thing here. Anyway, moving along here, more Detroit voting irregularities have been found. And part of the problem, as we mentioned before, what really began to give it away is when the recounters were opening up the supposedly sealed ballot boxes and discovering that the number of ballots in the boxes didn't match the number of voters recorded in the polling books. And apparently there was some other skullduggery going on trying to cover that up because 95 poll books went missing for days, several days. They kept saying, where's the polling book? We'll get it to you. We'll get it to you. Really, we're still filling in names. 5 of the poll books are still missing and unaccounted for. And Obama gets up there on TV today and says, you know, our election system is absolutely 100% honest and the integrity is not being questioned. I'm questioning it. We now have the names of those other states that have detected the Department of Homeland Security trying to break into their electronic voter information systems. So the list is now Georgia, Kentucky, and West Virginia, and probably other states are looking as well. And Basically, it looks to me like Department of Homeland Security may have been trying to plant evidence in the election systems. You know, like a text file. Yes, we hacked your election. Yours truly, hugs and kisses, Vladimir Putin. Now, do you remember when Barack Obama made that final address to America's armed forces, and he made that ridiculous suggestion that the armed forces refuse orders from incoming President Trump? And everybody was saying, what the heck was going on? As it turns out, Obama broke the law. He's technically guilty of military treason, and that's U.S. Code Section 2388, activities affecting the armed forces during war. And Obama encouraged the troops to disobey Trump. The liberalologists think they're above the law. That's the reality. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, I mentioned earlier in the show that Hillary has had a recent public appearance. Well, not really public, semi-public. She threw a thank you party for all of her billionaire supporters, to which I understand her campaign staffers were not invited, which I think is tacky. But, be that as it may. People who saw Hillary outside were commenting that she looks rode hard and put up wet, to put it simply. Doesn't look like she's still in the fight. But there's something even more telling going on because, everybody wanted their pictures taken with Hillary. Everybody's doing the selfie thing. That's all stopped. People are now actually turning their face away when pictures of Hillary are being taken by the corporate media. They don't want to be seen with her anymore. The shunning has begun. All righty, let's see. We're going to take a phone call. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael. I must say, I think the media needs to be prosecuted because basically they
What did we do?
Not you, the corporate media.
Thank you for that clarification.
But what I was going to say is they are the government. If there's one thing that we have found out during this election is that they are an appendage of the government.
Absolutely. There's Operation Mockingbird.
They
had
disgusting.
They came out about, I think, 6 years ago. Military intelligence officers are actually working in the CNN newsroom. So we're seeing the decline and fall of that corporate media ministry of propaganda. They're fighting back. They're trying to come on out and find some way around that First Amendment where they can say, we can shut all of these people down. We're going to filter Facebook. We're going to filter Twitter. And all that's doing is causing people to cancel their memberships in Facebook and Twitter and sign on to some of these new startups that promise censorship-free communication. Scene Life, Gab, Diaspora, a whole bunch of new ones coming online. A lot of them are still in beta, but they're going to take over because ultimately people want to go where they know they can tell the truth and read the truth. And what they're doing is they're turning Facebook and Twitter into just another version of CNN. And if you look at what's happened to CNN and their audience, that's obviously not going to work. People aren't going to go back to reading filtered, controlled news just because it's on Facebook when they've already abandoned it over on CNN.
That's right. They have too much dirt over decades to ever trust them again. And I love seeing this. They've worked so hard to control it, and it's coming apart, and it's the best thing that's happened for us in a while.
I absolutely agree, and I have no sympathy for them. They did it to themselves. They made their choice decades ago to abandon the public interest and side up with government and corporations against the people. And somewhere, I'm sure, the ghost of Edward R. Murrow is chuckling quietly.
Mm-hmm. And I always recall JFK saying in his speech I think it was his secret society speech where he was talking about there should be very few secrets kept from the public. In a democracy of free people, very few government secrets should be kept from its people. The whole Democratic Party, everything they do is a secret. Our whole government's a freaking secret.
You're absolutely right. The only legitimate secrets a government may keep from the people are those of a military nature. That's just common sense. But you don't hide from the American people that the Deputy White House Counsel was actually murdered instead of suicide. That was where they stepped across the line, as far as I'm concerned, in basically covering up for a homicide. And that's not what we were told the FBI is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I love seeing them crash right now. I think the Democratic Party's done. I can't wait for the ceremony where we can cry over their ashes, and I want the press to be right there with them because they suck.
Well, I don't plan on crying over the ashes. I had something else in mind, but I can't say it on the air, or the FCC will take away the licenses of our affiliates. But, you know, along with that might also be the GOP, because it's not like they're coming out of 2016 untarnished because of the way they fought tooth and nail against Donald Trump and the will of the people, to the point of even trying to force Ted Cruz on us, who isn't even eligible to be the President of the United States of America. And I think I would be very happy if both of these two party machines collapsed and made room for new parties. Because when this country was started, it wasn't a two-party system. Anybody could form a party. They were all on an equal footing. And that was to basically allow our society to evolve politically as well. This two-party system that was entrenched is a cost-saving mechanism for the corporations, because in the old days, the rich would have to give donations to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 candidates. And today, they only have to do 2 to bypass the will of the voter. And so that's the reason for the two-party system. But I think a two-party system has become just as corrupt as the one-party system in the old Soviet Union. And I'd like to see the Democratic Party Central Committee and all of those people collapse, and I'd like to see the same thing with the GOP.
You got that right. And actually, Trump, I don't really think Trump is an insider. I think he is an outsider. Let's hope that he is. Mm-hmm. And maybe he could help us start the new party with people like you and your listeners. We have a movement, and we need to hold them hold their feet to the fire, and let's get what we deserve is
I've already got the perfect name. I was talking about when I was running my own campaign for the 2016 election under the slogan, "He could hardly do any worse." I even had my own party set up. We called it the Wild Party.
Yeah, that sounds great. Sounds great.
Yes.
And it's not the Wild West.
Well,
right?
It is. Now, getting on back to Trump here, now, a lot of people are trying to say, oh, he's an insider, he knows these people, he knows that. Well, anybody with that kind of money is going to be in the same social circles with a lot of these people. That doesn't make him an insider. An insider is somebody who has grown up in that drug-corrupted, CIA-linked, that inner circle. And that is most assuredly not Donald Trump. Anyway, Alex, going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call here.
Bye.
We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And George Soros is at it again. Do you remember when I was back there saying after Trump won the election that we, the American people, are going to have to stand shoulder to shoulder with President-elect Trump? Our job is not over with Trump's inauguration. It's just getting started, because he's facing a hostile corporate media and an obstructionist Congress. He's up against a government full of people who don't want anything to change because they love the system the way it is. It's making them rich and you poor, and they think that's the way the gods intended it to be. So apparently, George Soros, along with a bunch of the big Wall Street players and even Google, are funding this liberal think tank, the Center for American Progress. And they are now setting themselves up to be the hub, the clearinghouse, the organizing force to basically block any changes Donald Trump wants to bring. So the big money is angry they didn't get their pet into the White House, and now they're going to spend even more money to make sure that this upstart, Donald Trump, doesn't ruin this wonderful little game that they've been playing on the American people for 30 years. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. And Claire's got some more that she's going to be mentioning as well. Now, Facebook, of course, is at the forefront of bringing on all this. We are going to decide for you what's real news and fake news. And this is coming from a company which has been forced to admit yet another in a seemingly endless series of metrics mistakes that artificially inflate Facebook's reader numbers, which means they get more money from the advertisers. And funny thing, all these accidental coding errors, these matrix mistakes, always seem to favor Facebook's bottom line. You would think if they were real mistakes, they would fall 50-50 on both sides of the line, some making money, some losing money. But amazing streak of luck for Facebook that all these mistakes always seem to improve Facebook's profitability. It's like back during the primaries, where Hillary's people kept winning the coin tosses time after time after time again, and not letting anybody get too close a look at those coins here. Paul Joseph Watson is out there reminding everybody that one of Facebook's fact checkers is the Washington Post, who only a short while ago had to admit they were putting out a fake news about the independent media being connected to Russian intelligence. Now, under the guise of combating foreign propaganda, the GOP-controlled Congress has passed a bill last week that is setting up what amounts to a Ministry of Truth. It's called the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act. And what it does is it provides generous subsidies and training to correspondents and prostitutes who will parrot the U.S. government's viewpoints. They're going to pay these people extra money to go online for the U.S. government. And ultimately, what they want is for anything that is about to be printed, published, broadcast, anywhere, has to get a government seal of approval first. Now, this is never going to stand a test before the United States Supreme Court, because it absolutely signals the end of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And right now, we're seeing the U.S. government act as desperately and panic-stricken as the Soviet Union was, as more and more people got onto that samizdat system of fax machines. And they couldn't figure out a way to shut that down. Now, you remember a few days ago, it was all over the corporate media about how this Santa Claus at the mall went to the hospital because the last wish of this 5-year-old boy was to see Santa, and Santa held him and said, when you get to the gates of heaven, tell him you're my number one elf, and they'll be sure and let you in. It was a heart-wrenching story, turned out to be unverifiable, to put it gently. And apparently this Santa in Knoxville, Tennessee, Eric Schmidt-Matson, this is his business. He's Santa every year, and he makes a good living at it. And he just managed to get himself a huge amount of free publicity out of this story. And the corporate media ran the story without checking it one tiny bit. And to show you just how petty and mean and vindictive the corporate media can be, Vanity Fair sent one of their reporters over to review a Trump-owned restaurant in Manhattan. And the resulting article had the banner headline, Trump Grill could be the worst restaurant in America. And it turns out the author of this, the food writer, wasn't really a food writer, but a known anti-Trump, highly biased liberal shill. So it's not enough that they're out saying Donald Trump is working for Vladimir Putin, and Donald Trump is having sex with his daughter Ivanka, and all the rest. Now they're out there saying, "Oh, the Trump restaurants, they're terrible. It's the Tomaine drive-through, and it's the botulism bistro," and they're just anything they can do to attack him. Now, as we've mentioned before, the corporate media is in serious, serious trouble. And the latest indication of that has to do with the New York Times, which is now going to vacate 8 floors of their headquarters building in order to turn them into rental properties. They're shrinking their operation. They're turning their own newspaper headquarters into rental office space to try and stay solvent. Interesting little article that came out of Bankrate.com talking about millennials, jobs you should not be thinking about getting into. And on the list is broadcast, corporate media. And they're saying the declining advertising revenue in radio, newspapers, and television is going to negatively impact the employment growth of these occupations. In fact, they're basically saying the employment in the corporate media is projected to decline 13% between 2014 and 2024. Now, for some reason, and I don't know why, Sheriff Arpaio got on out there talking about Barack Obama's birth certificate, and for some reason they're trying to fan it up. Maybe they weren't able to embarrass the independent media with Pizzagate, so they're trying to revive this whole one, and the forensic experts are saying that the proffered birth certificate by Obama is a forgery. It wasn't the original issued by the state of Hawaii. We already know that's true, and we already know the reason. Okay? And it's nothing. Obama's a love child, born in the 60s. Barack Obama's real father is Frank Marshall Davis. They look very much alike when you look at the pictures. I put the story back up at the front of whatreallyhappened.com. And Frank Marshall Davis, while going to the University of Hawaii, earned his living as a pornographer. And Obama's mother, also going to the University of Hawaii, was one of his models. And nature took its course. It was the summer of love, followed by the autumn of gonorrhea and the spring of the delivery room. That's all it was. And I don't know why they're trying to fan it up right now, but let's scotch this while we have the opportunity. Now, turning to the war zones, Zero Hedge is reporting that with regard to Aleppo, the U.S. is talking about a meltdown of humanity. They're still pushing this idea that Syria retaking Aleppo is a humanitarian disaster. They're not offering to send any humanitarian aid. That's all coming in from Russia. But it's a meltdown of sanity. Because the official Western narrative about the Syrian war is in absolute wreckage. There is social media coming out of Aleppo that shows the Syrian people are just happy as all heck about getting their city back, getting the U.S.-backed terrorists out of there. And there was this story earlier about how Syria and Russia were saying that some of the remaining pockets of jihadis were shooting at the civilian evacuation convoys, and then was right here on Fox News, they said, but we have sources that say it's really the pro-government forces because they're going to kill all the civilians. And they're still pushing this nonsense. Now, Russia's UN envoy, Churkin, is castigating the U.S. envoy, Samantha Power, for just going on and on and on about how Russia and Syria and Iran are guilty of conquest and carnage in Aleppo because, gosh darn it, that's our job and they should stay out of our business. Russia's ambassador to Great Britain organized a meeting of members of the parliament saying, okay, how would you deal with the terrorists in Syria? They didn't have an answer because they're not really thinking about that. The terrorists are a cover for a war of aggression. And it's almost like the attitude coming out of all these people is, we are good, and Russia is bad. And that's all you need to know. Don't you think about anything too carefully. You're of no use to us if you think and analyze and doubt. And if you're of no use to us, ooh, boy, are you in trouble. And let's see. We already talked about that part of it. We're coming up on a commercial break. When we come on back, more about the war zones and all that stuff that's going on. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're still talking about Syria, and we're getting a lot of argument back and forth. Has Aleppo been totally liberated? No, it isn't. Who's shooting at the civilians? It's the U.S.-backed terrorists. No, it's the Syrian government. I think it was Senator Hiram Johnson once said, truth is the first casualty of war, and it certainly is the case here right now. But I think at this point in time, it's a safe assumption that anything the U.S. government says or the corporate media says or that anybody says in support of what the corporate media and the government says is probably garbage and ought to be just discarded from that point. Now, as you know, ISIS has launched an attempt to retake Palmyra. They're running into trouble because a lot of the forces that were at Aleppo are now up there. And apparently ISIS was attempting to take over the Tias air base. They have been thwarted in that one. And the U.S. still is not giving up. And certainly Obama's comments about, we may be forced to have U.S. forces on the ground in Syria should tell that. And I want to hammer home a point that people need to remember, okay? The Syrian government has not asked for the presence of U.S. forces in Syria. The U.S. government has not granted permission for the U.S. to have military forces inside Syria. The government of Syria asked Russia to come on in and help with the terrorists, and Russia's apparently doing a very, very good job. And what we're seeing the U.S. government try to do is sell this ridiculous idea that Syria and Russia's approach to getting rid of the terrorists is somehow wrong, and the U.S. has a right to literally invade Syria and risk open war with Russia to show them the right way to deal with the terrorists, even though every time the U.S. has gone in, supposedly to attack ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they wind up bombing hospitals, food processing centers, water supplies, and other very costly Syrian infrastructure. Now, the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act includes a provision that will allow the U.S. government to give the U.S.-sponsored terrorists in Syria anti-aircraft weapons. That means man-portable missiles with which to shoot at Syrian and Russian warplanes. They're trying to replay Afghanistan. There's only one problem. When Charlie Wilson was running that war against Afghanistan, the American people didn't know that it was the U.S. behind the Mujahideen. The corporate media succeeded in selling that what was going on in Afghanistan was the courageous people of Afghanistan standing up to those evil Russians. And it was a lie. This was a covert war by the United States that started to try to take over Afghanistan, which is why the Soviet Union went in there. And then the U.S. went on in, and, Tom Hanks did a marvelous job in the movie, Charlie Wilson's War. But the reality was that this was a covert U.S. war providing weapons to use against the Russians. The difference today is everybody knows it's the U.S. behind all of this, trying to salvage a failed attempt at regime change. Been in this thing for 5 years now, and they're upping the ante. Now, up in Ukraine, where things are also getting tense, Ukrainian defense officials are now facing criminal charges in Russia over genocide of Russian-speaking people in the Donetsk Republic. So they're talking war crimes charges there as well. The European Union have now extended their sanctions against Russia because of the Russian threat. And this is not going to make the EU well-liked within the European Union itself, because the Russian sanctions have caused more economic ruin to the people of Europe than to Russia. But this is just the politicians in Brussels thumping their chests like silverback apes and saying, me, king of jungle, me, extend sanctions. Who cares if some French farmers are going out of business? I'm too important to be worried about them. It's amazing. Russia has expressed concern that the U.S. is extending their sanctions against Iran, saying it appears to be an attempt to destroy the P5+1 deal. And they're absolutely right. We'll be right back after these words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. The Washington Post is now claiming that FBI Director James Comey and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper are now agreeing with the CIA's assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election. Now, we don't know that Clapper and Comey actually said this, given the recent history of the Washington Post. We don't know what arms are being twisted. But come on, folks. If Putin could interfere in U.S. elections, we wouldn't have had 8 years of Obama. It's time to get real here. So we're talking about how the U.S. is once again extending Iran sanctions, and Russia is expressing concern that this threatens the P5+1 deal. That's the whole point. Now, following the P5+1 deal, Iran has complied with all of its requirements. The U.S. has not. The U.S. propaganda has been, well, yes, Iran is doing everything they said they would do, but they didn't do it fast enough, and they're still defiant to U.S. authority over their country, or some such nonsense as that. And they want the P5+1 deal to collapse because that will open the door to an eventual war inside Iran, which is what they're still out there. U.S. Navy, apparently not happy with the current military appropriations, is now saying they want to grow the Navy's fleet to a total of 355 ships. And they're talking about destroyers and attack subs. And frankly, I think before you start building some new ships, you ought to figure out why your current fleet of ships are such junk coming out of the shipyards. Like the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, which they're now admitting is too whiz-bang to ever really be combat effective. The Freedom-class littoral combat ships, chronic corrosion issues. The Independence-class littoral combat ships, drivetrain problems. The Zumwalt stealth destroyer, drivetrain problems. If you go to a store and you you spend money to buy something, and you get it home and it falls apart and it's junk, do you go back to that store again? No, you don't. I don't think the Navy should get any more money at all until they can get their act together and spend that money wisely, which they're certainly not doing now. Speaking of money, let's talk about the economy. And apparently, Wall Street banks are currently short $70 billion in funds the Federal Reserve says they need to have on standby in case there's a downturn. Now, the Federal Reserve's been out there saying that we know there's going to be some upsets down the road here, and you should have a cash reserve built up to weather the storm, and the Wall Street banks apparently aren't heeding the Federal Reserve because they're $70 billion short of the amount the Federal Reserve says they should have. Now, Italy is a flashpoint for the European economy. They've been getting no from the European Central Bank, and the disconnect continues to be between all of these countries that are struggling with hopelessly unpayable debt and the ECB or the IMF or the World Bank, whose attitude is, you need to drive your people down into poverty and give us the surplus, and then we'll loan you more money at interest to keep the cycle going. Now, the government in Rome is deciding that they need to inject 15 billion euros into the Italian banks to save them following the failure of Renzi's attempt to change the Constitution in order to make it easier to take more money away from the Italian taxpayers. Here's the problem. Where is Rome getting that 15 billion euros? They're not able to borrow it from the European Central Bank. They're taking it from the Italian taxpayers. Where are the Italian taxpayers going to get it? They're going to go to the bank and empty out their savings account. It's not going to work. There simply isn't enough money there to resolve the situation. Now, Greece was at loggerheads with the EU and with Merkel. And the issue there was Greece needs another bailout. And the austerity people were saying, well, we object to your plan to give all of your pensioners a little bit of a bump, a Christmas bonus, a one-time, a little extra money to do some Christmas shopping with, maybe stimulate the economy with that. And the ECB and international creditors basically said, no, you won't do that. You give that money to us, the bankers. The bankers. To heck with Christmas. We're your masters. We own you. You give us your money. That's the way it's supposed to be. The government of Greece basically said, okay, if that's how you feel about it, and then they went ahead with the Christmas bonuses for the pensioners. Because what are the pensioners going to do with that money? They're going to spend it. They're going to put it into the economy and start to stimulate it. And that's something everybody needs to understand about all this austerity that is coming out of these money junkies at the private central banks. They're paralyzing every economy they're predating upon. Because for an economy to be working properly, money must be flowing at all levels of society into all necessary sectors of economic development. If the money is piled up at the top of the pyramid and there is no mechanism for that money to be brought back down, recycled into high wages and salaries for the workers in order for them to pump it back into the economy at the shopping malls and the car dealerships and so forth, then the economy is going to lock up. And that's what's happening all across Europe, and it's starting to happen here. And the money junkies can't see it because they are money junkies. They're addicts. During that wonderful documentary, Inside Job, that won the Academy Award and then promptly vanished from the American media, they reported on how scientists had gone to Wall Street and they'd wired scanners to the heads of Wall Street traders. And they discovered that every time the Wall Street traders made a big score, had a big chunk of money come on in, just a number on the computer, didn't have paper and ink in their pocket, didn't have gold, didn't have anything, just they saw the number jump on the screen, and the part of the brain that lit up was exactly the same part that lights up when you do cocaine. It's an addictive process. And these money junkies, like any other addict, whether it's cocaine or meth or heroin, they're so trapped by their addiction, they can't see the harm they're causing to others around them. They don't care. All they want is that next fix. The money they have right now isn't going to do it. They need another chunk to come on in to get that cocaine-like thrill. And not too surprisingly, there's a huge amount of cocaine abuse on Wall Street. Now, I get a lot of emails when I talk about the bankers and the money junkies saying, oh, you just hate rich people. No, I don't hate rich people. I'd like to be rich myself. It's the way they do it. You look at people like Steve Jobs, or James Cameron, or George Lucas, or J.J. Abrams. These are people who are making something we voluntarily trade our money for. And that's a good way to get rich. And we admire and respect people who do that, who give you something substantive in exchange for your money, because that is how capitalism is supposed to work. My problem is with the money addicts who bribe politicians to game the system so that money just automatically flows from your pocket into their pocket, and then they take all that money home and they spread it around on the living room carpet and they take off their clothes and roll around naked on it and they have orgasms. Those people I got a problem with. They're pathologically ill. They're in the grip of an addiction. What we need is a Betty Ford clinic for the ultra-rich, where we take the money junkies and we take the straitjacket off and we put them in a simulated Wall Street office with all mahogany paneling and rich carpeting and all kinds of stuff all over. But make them feel comfortable. And on the floor, there's a $20 bill that is wired to a spark coil. And every time they reach down and grab that $20 bill, they get a shock that knocks them across that room. Because that's what they used to do to get people to quit smoking, is give you an electric shock when you touch the cigarette. So we need to start doing the same thing to the money junkies. Let's take a phone call. Al in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I hope you and Claire are doing well.
We're doing okay.
I love your analogies. If I could, I would ask you to maybe do a graphic on these big fat cats rolling around in all their ill-gotten cash. But anyway, as you were pointing out, with this unpayable debt, I mean, when interest rates are low, that's when you pay this stuff back. And obviously it's getting worse and it's not happening. So when they start jacking up the rates, and they are, it's only going to compound even faster.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, how far straight up does it have to go?
Well, here's the thing. The interest rates are always adjusted in order to absorb as much of the flowing capital that's available. When the rates are low, it's basically signaling that there isn't a lot of liquidity, there's not a lot of volume of cash going on, and yes, it would be great for people to take advantage of the lowered interest rates to be able to pay back their variable rate credit cards or mortgage or car loans, but the problem is they don't have the money. It's like right now, if you look at the commercials for the car companies, those are amazingly good deals, but nobody's got the money to do anything about it. When the American people start getting money back, the prices go on up, because prices always rise to absorb as much of the available wealth as possible. The prices have actually very little to do with the value of the underlying product. Now, the problem the Federal Reserve is facing in dealing with the basis points, the prime rate, is that if they raise the rates, as you say, it's going to lock up the American economy. The Wall Street people are going to have to pay a higher cost for the money with which they're gaming the system, and that means the stock market is going to start getting dragged down, the punch protection team notwithstanding. The problem is with leaving the interest rates down is it makes the dollar less desirable in other countries as either a global currency or a banking currency. Nobody's going to invest in the dollar if the rate of return in that dollar is virtually nil. And so that's the corner the Federal Reserve is in right now.
Oh, and it's not only the Federal Reserve. I mean, it's all over the world that this problem.
Oh, yeah, it's all the private central banks.
Far East countries.
Economic globalism has linked all of these systems together. So when one goes down, it will take the whole system down with it. And that will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the people of planet Earth to stand up and say, no more private central banks. We demand governments have a public currency that's managed as a public utility, not as a privatized for-profit scam, which we are forced to be dependent on.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mike. I love your show.
Thank you very much. Same to you, and we're going to let you go here. So let's talk about Obamacare. People who are on those Obamacare-compliant policies are going to be getting sticker shock if they've not already received it. And despite the soaring prices for the policies and the sky-high deductibles, the insurance companies are still claiming that they're losing money because not enough people are buying the policies. Most are just opting to take the IRS penalty instead. And so now there's actually talk about rationing the insurance to allow the health insurance companies to put a cap on how many Obamacare-compliant policies they issue in order to control their losses. And this, I think, is the final nail into this hoax called Obamacare, because it certainly failed in its overt purpose of making health care affordable in America. It failed in its covert purpose of enriching the health insurance companies who were going to give the U.S. government a mafia-like piece of the action in taxes. And now the health insurance companies who were fully supportive of this actually wrote the Affordable Care Act. Now they're all screaming they're in trouble. And one of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act that most people are not aware of is a provision for government bailouts for health insurance companies that fail. in this program. One way or the other, under Obamacare, money flows from your pocket into the owners of the health insurance companies' pockets. That's what it's all about. Now, turning to immigration, the German Home Affairs Minister is saying, effectively, Germany's streets and squares are now under control of the migrants. It's completely out of control. There's been a fire at a migrant center near Paris, 1 dead, several hurt. They're calling the fire having a criminal origin. Somebody set the fire deliberately. Could have been somebody who posed to the immigrants. Could have been the immigrants themselves. The refugees have been destroying the refugee centers because they're waiting for the free homes they were promised when they started their trip. Okay. Let's see. Over in Switzerland, remember they had a referendum to leave the EU? The Swiss politicians have basically told the Swiss voters, no, we don't care what you want. We know what's best for the world and the European Union. So democracy is now officially dead in Switzerland, unless there's a revolution. Apparently, Theresa May was at an EU summit, and it was very obvious the rest of the EU leaders were snubbing her for Brexit. Ooh, shun her. She's not one of us anymore. So let's talk a little bit about computers. As you know, Yahoo had a hack attack. 1 billion accounts were compromised, and apparently it's been tracked that this data was sold on the dark web last August for $300,000. That was the price, the payoff for all this data. So criminals now have your Yahoo account data. You should change your password if you've got anything sensitive on there at all. Here's where it gets interesting. That stolen Yahoo data includes government employee information, which now can be made available to foreign intelligence services to identify employees, find employees who are in financial difficulty, which makes them targets for subversion, along with being able to hack their personal and work accounts. This is a major threat to national security. Where the heck was the NSA when all this was going down? All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we come up on the top of the hour, and Lady Claire joining us for the hour number 3 here, as you know, we're getting this intense cold all over Canada, all over the Northern Hemisphere. Record cold all over the place, heavy snow, got 30 inches on the tops of the volcanoes on the Big Island, and they're still out there talking carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax. And they're in a bit of a bind because even though they rebranded from human-caused global warming to human-caused climate change, the argument for a carbon tax was that burning fossil fuels put more carbon dioxide into the air. Carbon dioxide warms the planet. That's what Al Gore was always screaming about. So if the world is getting colder, taxing carbon makes absolutely no sense at all. And they were in a bit of a bind. But they have found a way out of it. And you're not going to believe this. NASA has just announced that, oh my goodness, we were wrong all along. Burning fossil fuels doesn't warm planet Earth, it cools it off. And all this snow and ice that we are seeing is all the fault of people who are burning gasoline and coal. And see, we can save the world from the new ice age if we tax your carbon. And then they wonder why people think NASA stands for never a straight answer. I mean, it is absurd here, absolutely. Now, as you know, many states are starting to legalize marijuana, and a new industry study is showing that as marijuana becomes available to consumers, they are preferring it over alcohol. And we knew that this was going to be the reality. And much of the funding to oppose marijuana legalization came from the alcohol industry, from the breweries and distilleries. Hardly any surprise there. It's all about fighting turf. It wasn't really about public health and safety. It was always about preserving profits of favored corporations here. Now then, there was this nurse, Megan Haynes, 49 years old. and she has been sent to prison for at least 27 years for murdering 2 residents at a New South Wales aged care facility by injecting them with lethal doses of insulin. And I mention this in passing along with that oncologist who got put in jail for telling perfectly healthy people they had cancer so he could make money off treating them, that we shouldn't assume that somebody wearing a white laboratory coat is somehow more honest and trustworthy than anybody else we meet in this world. And we have to be really careful what's coming out of those needles, especially when it's big, big, big business. Now then, apparently over at the National Health Service, there's been another scandal where a company has bought exclusive rights to a medication and then jacked up the price of this drug by 12,000%. See, it's not about health, it's not about curing, it's about money. The money has corrupted virtually every aspect of human society. Okay, there's the music. We're going to take a break here. When we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here to hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who does join us on hour number 3 Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. So what is the first thing that you want to talk about today?
Well, this has not been given a great deal of coverage on corporate American media.
Actually, it was on Fox.
Oh, it does?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
they were going to town. How dare they do this?
But apparently, China's Navy has seized an American underwater drone in the South China Sea. And this was an underwater drone that was deployed by an American, I believe, Navy-owned oceanographic vessel in what were said to be international waters in the South China Sea, triggering a formal diplomatic protest from the United States and a demand for its return, a U.S. defense official told Reuters on Friday. The incident is the first of its kind in recent memory, and it took place yesterday off the northwest of Subic Bay, off the Philippines, just as the United States Navy ship Botich, an oceanographic survey ship, was about to retrieve the unmanned underwater vehicle, the official said, speaking on condition of anonymity. And what they said was the UUV was lawfully conducting a military survey in the waters of the South China Sea, the official said. It's a sovereign immune vessel, clearly marked in English, not to be removed from the water. That it was U.S. property. Well, Mike, the first logical question I've got to be asked was, what were the GPS coordinates here?
Well, we probably will never find out here, but I mean, the autonomous underwater drone, like the aerial drone, it represents the latest technology. And by the way, incidents like this have already happened, like when Iran succeeded in bringing down one of our drones over their territory, and it was clearly someplace it had no business being.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like this military survey they were talking about was this drone was sent on in to spy on China's activities on their islands in the South China Sea.
Right.
And from China's point of view, that is their territorial waters. The Cairo Convention says these are Chinese territorial waters.
Yeah.
And so from China's point of view, the U.S. is an invader, as it has been in so many other parts of the world.
Right.
And China has a right to stop and block any foreign military assets that are invading their territory without permission.
Yeah.
And so the U.S. is going to try and spin it, how dare those Chinese stop us from going wherever we decide that we want to go. And they're trying to talk tough because the war party is still trying to find a way to get these wars going before Donald Trump takes office and is in a position to yank the plug on any of this stuff.
I do have a feeling that whatever they were doing, it was not straight oceanographic research.
No, they said it was a military survey.
Yeah. The other news that I wanted to share, apparently the U.S. government and oligarchs are behind planned fake news flagging on Facebook. And Facebook apparently is adding a new feature where a group that the Washington Post calls an independent third-party fact-checker will decide whether stories are true or false and flag the ones the group decides are false. But the one thing that they don't mention is that this alleged independent fact-checker, the Pointer International Fact-Checking Network, receives its funding from a U.S. government group, the National Endowment for Democracy, which a couple of award-winning reporters, Robert Perry and Bill Blum, have documented was created to perform tasks previously performed by the CIA.
Yes, they're privatizing the propaganda here.
Yeah.
Here's the point. All of the so-called independent third-party fact-checkers are known hardcore liberal gatekeepers. And so that's what they're trying to do is basically turn Facebook into another controlled media like CNN, and it certainly didn't work for CNN in terms of their audience decline.
Nope.
It's not going to work for Facebook. In fact, we just posted a YouTube video from somebody saying it's time to disconnect from Facebook and start going to these brand new startups that are promising censorship-free communication. And according to Alexa, the sign-ups at these new startups is just going right through the roof.
Yeah. And the president of NED, neocon Carl Gershman, pointed out that it would be terrible for democratic groups around the world to be seen as subsidized by the CIA. Well, hello, too late. You know, and I would also urge people who have been using Facebook to go to these alternative sites. Mike, I know you've got one up on your website.
I have two on the website, Scene Life, which is a Facebook clone, and Gab, which is a Twitter clone, and there's another one called Diaspora that I've signed up for, but I don't have the tag on there. I'm going to be building a comprehensive list of all of these new startup social medias or freedom media. I think it should be the name that we're going to put on it. And I will encourage people to take their social media experience over to these new outlets and just cut off Twitter and Facebook, because Twitter and Facebook are just being turned into more controlled media, controlled by the government, controlled by the corporations.
Right.
And we've already got enough of that coming off of our cable TV system. We don't need any of it anymore. And again, Facebook just got caught once again with a metrics accident overcharging their advertisers. So it's not like we're dealing with the paragon of virtue. I need to take a second here to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And back to the Lady Claire.
Apparently, the U.S. is in process of shipping 1,600 tanks to a Dutch arms depot in a clear message to Russia. And they've started moving these tanks to a storage facility in the Netherlands in a bid to deter Russia amid the biggest NATO buildup in Europe since the Cold War. And they're due to be stored at a 6-warehouse complex in the southeastern village of Eygelshoven near the Belgian and German borders. The Eygelshoven facility was originally opened in 1985 during the Cold War, when it was used by U.S. troops to practice drills in case of a possible Soviet attack.
Well, you know, it's very obvious who the aggressor is in this rush to a new world war. You look at how many countries the U.S. has invaded, regime changed, overthrown, drone struck. We're seeing this massive NATO buildup on the border of Russia, and then they turn around and say, Russia's the aggressor. No. If Russia had warships in the Gulf of Mexico, if Russia was parking tanks on the northern side of our border with Canada or the southern side of our border with Mexico, that's Russian aggression. Okay? Russia is staying in their own country. They're minding their own business, except for aiding Syria in getting rid of the U.S. invaders down there.
Right.
But this NATO buildup is clearly an aggressive move trying to get a war going. And as William Binney says, even if the war does not actually go hot, the purpose of this is to justify taking more money away from you and spending it on weapons, the defense contractors, the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, and have an excuse why they can't spend your tax money on you or your children or your streets, your community, your infrastructure. We're just going to have to let it rot away because those gosh darn Ruskies, we have to spend money to build a bigger scarecrow than they have.
And this article also talked about the Ukrainian crisis and how terrible that was and trying to blame Russia for it when actually in 2014 that was generated by the U.S. government, Soros organizations, and the IMF to throw the duly elected Ukrainian president Yanukovych under a bus and anoint the more Western-centric Poroshenko as president.
And there's an interesting story there because basically what it was, the European Union was courting Ukraine to merge with them, and Yanukovych was looking at what's going on in the nations of Europe, and he could see that it was headed to a disaster. Russia made a more attractive offer, and Yanukovych said, yeah, we're going to do that. Yep. And that's when the U.S. went in, and they overthrew Yanukovych, and they put in Poroshenko, the chocolate king. And here's another reminder. They tried to legitimize Poroshenko's place as a puppet ruler by having an election. Well, if Putin could rig elections, Poroshenko would have lost that one.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, basically what it is, we know about the referendums. Crimea said, we don't want to be part of a government we didn't choose. And they voted to leave Ukraine, which is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then they had a second referendum to merge with Russia. The official policy of NATO is, we don't care what the Crimean people voted for. Yep. We refuse to recognize their referendums. Therefore, by default, Russia has confiscated and stolen and annexed Crimea. That's the circuitous thinking.
Right. And what happened here, Crimea had been very much an industrial powerhouse of the Ukraine. And now, with it having joined the Russian Federation, it has become an industrial powerhouse of Russia. And apparently, now there were a lot of problems at the beginning. I'm not going to mince facts, but it looks like the Crimean economy is starting to emerge well. Factories are running, things are going more smoothly. And for anyone who knows their history, Crimea got annexed to Ukraine by Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev in the 50s. And they're Russian people, and probably a lot closer to the Russian people in a lot of ways than Ukraine, to which it got annexed.
And as a little footnote to that, it was actually illegal for him to do that under Russian law. But we know politicians like to think that they're above the law and everything. Do I need to take you down? Okay, all right. So that's basically where we are right now. Now, up in Ukraine itself, they are deeply in debt. They can't pay their gas bill to Russia. Russia has been very, very patient, not just shutting off that valve over all the unpaid money. And but in the process of all this civil war, Ukraine's industrial base and agricultural base have been decimated, where Ukraine, their economy can't make any repayments on all this money that's just being poured into this black hole of debt. The people of Ukraine are very unhappy with Poroshenko. There have been protests and riots in Kiev, which are not getting media coverage because they're in favor of the wrong person, as it were. And it is a real mess. And it's another example of how the U.S. government and corporations just create chaos throughout the world in the hope that somewhere down the road they're going to make an extra buck or two off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it still remains very much a hot spot. I'd like to sort of bop back over to Europe. And this comes from Max Slavos. The hits the fan.
Okay.
Economics, immigration, and terrorism. Europeans could see civil war, unrest, and utter chaos. And apparently there have been warnings left, right, upside down, and backwards from experts and military people that there's going to be an intersection of massive economic issues, immigration, and terrorism, and it's going to lead to a full-scale crisis in Europe. They have predicted that this will affect the entire continent, eventually leading to civil war on the streets. And before the guy got canned, it seems that Switzerland's Lieutenant General and Chief of the Armed Forces, André Blattmann, had foreseen what was to come. He warned last year the combination of hybrid wars, the economy, and the refugee crisis would have unforeseen dimensions. He then claimed social unrest was something Europe's leaders and armies had to be prepared for. The Swiss might be historically neutral, Mike, but they aren't blind to the upheaval that could eventually threaten stability at home in their independent nation and surrounding them on the rest of the European continent. And it was very strange to me in looking at this, Mike, that no one in the EU could seem to think this concept through. In other words, what the negative response would be coming from the effects of massive immigration from countries which do not accept the European mindset on anything. And it did set up Europe for a clash of civilizations. This could get nasty.
It could get very nasty.
Yeah.
And something that you need to understand, ordinary people in Europe are definitely not on board with this rush to war.
Mm-hmm.
And again, for people in the United States, war on our own soil is almost a legend. It's mythic because it happened so long ago. We had the Civil War, and aside from a few carefully preserved monuments and battlefields, there's no trace of it to remind us about what was really going on. Europe is very different. When I was over there working there in the 1980s, going all over Germany and Italy, the scars from the two world wars are still very, very visible. It's a very real thing to the people of Europe. And they're understanding now that if the U.S. succeeds in provoking a new world war, it's going to be fought on their front lawns and streets for a third time. And they're not happy about that one tiny bit.
I can certainly understand that. But I think that there was a degree of what you and I would probably define as magical thinking on the part of the EU that they could absorb all of these immigrants who have completely different perspectives, completely different lifestyles, and completely different philosophies as to how things are done, and then not be able to have them work.
Well, that was all coming down from Soros and his New World Order people. They're very liberal, and liberals have as an article of absolute faith that what is in the heads of people can be changed by changing the environment around them.
Mm-hmm.
And that all goes back to Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa, which purported to demonstrate that because of how the environment was in Samoa, children grow up through adolescence into adulthood without all the emotional turmoil that you see in young people in other countries. The problem was the book was a complete hoax. And Mead went down there not to find out what was going on, but to find something that she could use to push an already in existence agenda, the tabula rasa philosophy, that we are born with completely blank brains and everything that's in there is a result of our environment, our schooling, our society, our media. And she made friends with two young ladies, and Mead made some flat-out assumptions about Samoa that were wrong. She describes Samoa's culture as sexually promiscuous and completely open because the culture in Hawaii of the same time period was that way. But in point of fact, each little island in Pacifica, because they are so isolated, they grow up they evolve very different cultures. And Samoa is rigidly monogamous. They don't fool around. But Mead found these two girls. She didn't go out and do any research. She found these two girls and talked to them. And Polynesians like to talk story. They like to be polite. And these two young women saw that Mead was wanting to hear certain things. So just out of politeness and not realizing that Mead was going to write a book out of this thing, they told Margaret Mead what Margaret Mead clearly wanted to hear. And she wrote the book, and that became the foundation for the liberal philosophy and all this nonsense about if we dress little boys and little girls in the same clothes, and if we give them the same toys, they'll stop acting like little girls and little boys. And yet, the reality is the opposite. No matter how unisex or uniform you make the playrooms and the clothes, little boys will act like little boys, and little girls will act like little boys. And changing those restroom signs around isn't going to change it. It isn't going to fix that. And because the liberals will not go back and question that first founding principle is why they keep making these horrific mistakes, like thinking they were going to bring all these refugees into Europe and everybody was going to trade wet, sloppy kisses, sing around the campfire, toasting marshmallows and singing Kumbaya.
No. And I've got an anecdote to share with you.
Oh, please share the anecdote.
About Samoan culture, at least here on Oahu. On occasion, I will play keyboards for various, sometimes memorial services. I'm much happier with weddings. And I was accompanying a very lovely Samoan lady on her wedding, singing the New Jerusalem with her husband. And her sister, I think it was the rehearsal, and she said to me very quietly, "Claire, you know that in some families, after a relationship is consummated, a Samoan young woman will take that sheet back to her mother.
Yes.
As proof that she remained pure until she got married.
Actually, many cultures have that.
Yeah.
The idea being to preserve the inheritance rights of the father.
Yes.
That he is really leaving the pigs to his offspring and not the offspring of the Peace Corps worker or the UN troops in the area.
Peacekeeper, yes.
Yeah, the peacekeepers.
Yeah.
I'm keeping my peace.
But no, that is still, and I mean, this was like a couple of years ago, so still in the 21st century, some of these traditions, at least within the Samoan Christian community, do continue.
And I mean, look, all right, we got to take a break here. That came in a little loud. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and grab a quick phone call from David in Texas. David, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Hi, Mike. The question I have is, Donald Trump would like to start some businesses here in the United States, and the idea that I have is that if he were to offer the businesses, and if they were to offer daycare and have ladies that can bring their children to work with them, that would help out because they would have to not look for somebody to look after their kids. And if the government could possibly work out a deal, possibly a junior 401k, or if they could just pay a little bit for the daycare, they could also take money and put it in a fund for their kids in the future.
I think you're overlapping. I think you're overlapping. Hang on. I think you're overlapping a couple of different ideas. So let's just treat with them one at a time. First of all, I'm fully in agreement with the idea of having daycare. I think it's certainly reasonable for a company that wants to build up their staff and train them and have continuity of staff. It makes sense because if you have daycare, your female workers or your male workers, either one, are going to be more productive because they're not distracted by that care issue. The problem is that our current corporate climate is pushing away from full-time, long-enduring staff into easily swappable workers that come and go, moment to moment. And at that point, the corporations really don't think about their efficiency because they're going to be inefficient to begin with. And I actually, when I was still working in visual effects, I actually saw this happen where some of the visual effects companies were starting up had this attitude of, we're going to hire up a bunch of people for the project, and the project's over, we're going to fire them, and then when we get the next project, we'll bring the people back. The problem was that contrary to the sales pitches from the software and hardware companies, it could take 3 to 4 months to train people up on the systems. And even as the systems became standardized, each studio had a different production workflow. And so when you spend 3 to 4 months training a worker and then you just throw them out the door, you're throwing out that training with them. And as a result, I saw some companies actually go out of business because they would get a new project, hire a bunch of people, think that the production was going to go as smoothly as the previous one with the trained staff, and immediately ran into trouble. Yeah. Okay. Now, as far as the other one about some kind of a mini 401k, I think we need to return to a world where people are making enough money on their own, where they're encouraged to save and invest on their own, because all of these government programs have proven to be so badly mismanaged, Social Security being the worst among them, and now we're hearing talk about the government confiscating 401ks and IRA accounts and forcing people to invest in new special treasury notes, which are worth, well, they're not worth the paper they're printed on. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think more of the same is going to cure that.
Well, I was sitting there thinking that if you had somebody, a young man or woman working there, and they would realize, where are we going to get a deal like this where we can have our child with us at work and we're only paying, say, $10, $15 a day for that? You would have a productive worker that would realize, I'm not going to get a better deal than this. I'm going to work my backside off to make sure I keep this job.
You're right.
I just thought, Maybe I've watched It's a Wonderful Life too many times, Mike.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and that's a very wise way of managing staff for the long term. Unfortunately, these days, everybody's thinking no further than the next stockholders report or the next promotion. And the other problem, of course, is with this flood of illegal immigrants and refugees being brought in and made citizens, we have a workers' surplus. We've got 90 million Americans looking for work that can't find jobs. Mm-hmm. And in that kind of a situation, employers feel that they don't have to take care of workers. Workers will put up with any inconvenience or hardship just to get the job. It very much works against the individual workers. Businesses don't have to make their employees happy. If you don't like the way we're treating you, you're out the door, and there's a line of people waiting for your job.
And there's another issue, too, that I think we need to address. The entire nature.
We have to address it after the commercial break. All right, we'll address the issue. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Claire, you wanted to make a point about workers. This is a global issue.
Yeah, the increased mechanization and the use of robots in what used to be hand labor is putting us into a whole new paradigm when it comes to work. And I remember a Top Gear episode with James May where he showed people around on his show.
Actually, I think that was a standalone show that he did.
All right.
And it was like a mini-series with about 5 episodes, and they went through the factory. Here's the problem. On a national scale, your employees are also your customers. If you are organizing your business to offshore manufacturing or to automate your manufacturing and you're letting your employees go, where do you think they're going to get the money to come and buy those products that you're making? And I think this is a classic example of my primary criticism of the U.S. government, that they are not thinking in terms of what's good for the nation as a whole. They're only doing the bidding of their masters, their financial backers, their corporate masters, and they're only thinking in terms of the end of the next term in office or the next promotion. And if there's one person who should be keeping an eye on what is best for the nation as a whole, it's supposed to be that person in the Oval Office here.
Right.
But we have seen, when offshoring first began and companies' profits went up and everybody said, this is a great thing to do. And then here we are years later, where all of these large retailers and manufacturers are standing around hovering on the edge of collapse and saying, why is nobody going into the shopping malls and buying the products we're making? Because you took their jobs away.
And Mike, I've got something to add to that.
Yes.
Many times liberals talk about certain areas of the country like the Rust Belt and Kentucky and et cetera as flyover areas. Mm-hmm. But the people who live there are not flyover people.
And they're all Trump voters.
Yeah, and they are and were legitimately angry at what happened to them, and I don't blame them one bit.
Well, I think the attitude that has come across from Hillary and the liberal elites is that the what's good for them is good for the nation, and that the nation should be constructed to basically care for them only at the expense of everybody else, to look at their ideology and their agenda at the expense of everybody else. And you can't run a country like that. There has to be that overview. And you know what's amazing? John Nash proved that mathematically, that you have to have that global overview or you're going to lock up the system somehow, somewhere.
And that looks like it's coming up pretty quickly.
It looks like it's coming up. Now, before we go back to another story from Claire, I've got 2 things I've got to catch up on. You have probably seen all over the corporate media the story over the last week where Donald Trump is skipping his intelligence briefings. I don't need to go get my intelligence briefings. I know everything I need to know. And, of course, then the corporate media will turn around and criticize him, saying, see, he's not willing to do the job as president. See, we were right to push Hillary Clinton on you. Well, Reince Priebus on Fox News has just come on out and said, no, in point of fact, Donald Trump gets his intelligence briefings every single day. That this whole thing in the media about how he's skipping the briefings is just another corporate media lie to demonize Donald Trump and somehow help Hillary Clinton next Monday, which at this point doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Fake news, thy name is corporate media.
Absolutely. And as I said at the top of the show, right now, as near as we can tell, the only possible path remaining for Hillary Clinton to get to the White House next year is for Donald Trump to be assassinated before Monday. And so I hope his security people are being very, very careful about that. Now, the next story, and you're not going to believe this one, okay? Apparently, a George Soros think tank has come on out with an explanation for all these refugee migrant sex attacks all over Europe. It's a plot by Vladimir Putin to boost the right-wing parties. It's an evil plot. These refugees wouldn't be raping all these women, except they're getting phone calls and text messages from Putin to rape women so that the right-wing political parties can gain over the left wing. I mean,
they don't even speak Russian. And if these immigrants don't speak English, it's insane, Michael.
Of course it's insane.
Yeah.
But Soros right now, his lifelong dream has been the single global government, the New World Order, and it's coming apart on him.
Yeah.
He's, 86 now.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to be around a whole heck of a lot longer. In fact, 86 is long enough. George, why don't you just sort of bow on out and let us have our planet back here again? But that's his latest thing. Germany is literally ordering their own media not to report on all of these refugee rapes and assaults that are going on because it makes the refugee program look bad and it makes Angela Merkel look bad. Well, she ought to. But it's all coming apart. And so now apparently Soros' think tank is out there saying that everybody in Europe would be hugging each other and everything would be fine, but Putin has somehow convinced all of these migrants to carry out these heinous sex crimes. Like, they're so mindlessly numb and able to control that a text message comes in on the smartphone saying, rape a woman in front of you, and they say, I must obey, and, go on off and do this. It's absurd. And again, we're starting to see the lies coming out of the establishment, clearly jumping the shark at this point. In fact, I think you could line up 3 sharks end to end on this one and whiz Soros across on his motorcycle.
Yeah, it's desperation on the cusp of madness and has absolutely no relationship to reality.
I think that's going to be our new rating system here. Instead of the Pinocchio,
yes,
it's going to be the shark system. How many sharks would this lie jump? That's a 3-shark lie right there. Okay,
I agree.
All right, that's our new standard here. Okay, what is your next story?
Starving Yemeni children, bloated weapons makers. And while the world is kind of focused on Syria, there is another tragedy that's not getting a whole lot of coverage, definitely not by the corporate media. Battered by the twin evils of war and hunger, every 10 minutes, a child in Yemen is dying from malnutrition, diarrhea, and respiratory tract infections. A new UNICEF report shows over 400,000, that's almost 500,000 kids, suffering with acute malnutrition. Without immediate medical attention, these kids will die. And the situation with these kids is so dire that over half of the entire nation's 25 million people lack sufficient food. Now, this is because, and I'm just going to say it out loud, of the Saudi blockade of Yemen, of all the ports.
Aided by U.S. weapons.
Food cannot get in. And what makes me furious, and I have posted some very graphic images on the web in articles I've posted, because the U.S., through its enabling of the Saudi government, has become complicit in its war crimes and genocide against the people of Yemen.
I think you have it backward. The Saudis are operating as proxies for the U.S. government, and the reason for the blockade is to starve the people of Yemen into giving up this ridiculous idea of running their own country and accept foreign U.S. puppet rule.
And there is a question of how much aid Iran is providing. And the Saudi government feels that Iran is an existential threat, so any possibility of expanding their influence in Yemen, which is right on the Saudi border, is something that the Saudi government is reacting to with extreme prejudice, shall we say.
Actually, that's just more of the propaganda. Iran is not a war-making country.
No, it's not.
They have not started a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years.
Yeah.
It is not in their nature.
Yeah. It's, but I look at these images and my heart goes out to these children and their families. No one would want to see their child die like that.
Absolutely
no one.
not.
No.
Absolutely not.
And bobbing back over to the U.S., there was an article in What Does It Mean? Flint 2.0, Texas City warns residents not to drink or use their tap water. Now, this is down in Corpus Christi, Texas, where residents have been warned not to use their water because it has been contaminated by a toxic chemical from a Valero asphalt plant called Indulin AA86. Now, if you take a look at the material safety data sheet, which is supplied by the company, this stuff is really, really nasty. I mean, the things that it can cause, lung problems, skin irritation, tissue damage, organ damage.
Yep.
You know, this stuff is nasty.
But we've got a pill to sell you for it. Won't fix it. You'll make you feel better. Okay.
But someone had to be asleep at the wheel at Valero's asphalt plant. If this was sort of the way that the Valero damage control team is describing it, is that it was flowback from some work that was done and they can reverse it very quickly. But I've got to tell you, it looks like just with Flint, safety standards were abandoned. And when that happens, this kind of situation will move forward.
Well, I think this is another reason why Trump had his landslide victory, because the American people are realizing they're paying higher taxes than before, they're paying more money for everything before, everything's being privatized and corporatized, and the basic necessities of life that we have been told we depend on the government to provide, like safe drinking water, aren't there anymore. After all this argument and finger-pointing and lawsuits and everything, the tap water in Flint, Michigan is still unsafe to drink. And the bottled water is already running out. And the attitude is, who cares? If they come down with lead poisoning, you know, that'll help the medical industrial complex. They'll need treatment for the kids' melting brains and everything. And the attitude is clearly that we, ordinary Americans, only exist to be harvested, to make money off of any way that can be done, and that's a good thing because it generates tax revenues. And all of the considerations appear to have been completely abandoned. Now, I want to remind everybody, if you're concerned about the safety of the drinking water where you are, you can go out on eBay and you can get a water test kit for about $20. The one that we got tested 5 different things, lead content, microbial, and water hardness, which we were off the chart on because we get our water from inside an extinct volcano, and 2 others. And it turns out our water coming out of the tap right here where we live is actually very, very good, except for being excessively hard. But it's worthwhile if you're concerned about where you are. And if your water turns out to be not safe, you need to start screaming about your local water supply. Now, obviously, companies like Nestle stand to profit if the water utility systems become unsafe to drink and cook with, because then you're forced to buy their bottled water. And Nestle continues to suck the remaining fresh, uncontaminated water out of the aquifers for pennies for thousands of gallons, put it in a plastic bottle and sell it to people for a couple of bucks. And it's amazing. I mean, the CEO of Nestle actually came on out and said, humans do not have a natural right to clean drinking water. If they want it, they must buy it from us. Next, it's going to be air, where they'll let the pollution get completely out of control, and if you want clean air to breathe, you will have to pay for it. And believe it or not, over in Japan and China, in some of the worst polluted areas, like Beijing, there are literally booths where you can walk on in and you put your money in a slot, and there'll be a blast of filtered air, clean air that you can breathe to try and recover from all of this. And again, that's the world that we live in right now. Ordinary people are just there to be profited from by any means necessary. Get them chronically ill, sell them pills, never let them get cured, never let them get independent, never let them become self-sufficient. And it's an ugly, ugly situation. And this is what George Soros thinks is a great way for the planet to continue.
Yeah. I seem to recall that Nestle was sucking water out of a lot of aquifers in Northern California on a lease that has expired.
Yeah,
and for pennies on the dollar.
And that's the reason they've got a water shortage in California. Yeah. Nestle is sucking out this water. Their permit expired years ago. The permit actually cost them something, like pocket change, essentially. And they're emptying out the aquifer. And 2 of the remaining 3 freshwater aquifers in California have become contaminated with fracking fluid. Plus, the water infrastructure itself is in decay. The aqueduct system is cracked. It's leaking huge amounts of usable water into the desert. The water mains underneath the city of Los Angeles are cracked and broken. They're leaking literally millions of gallons of fresh drinking water just down into the soil. And again, we don't have water. Well, go to the supermarket. You can buy bottles of water there. I don't know what you're complaining about. What's wrong with you people? Well, I'm paying a water bill every month. Well, okay, but there's water there. You can put it on your lawn, I guess, if you don't mind your plants dying.
Yeah, and where is Governor Jerry Brown in California on this? That's what I want to know.
Oh, he's out there on his war on guns. We're going to take away the guns. We have to, and this new bill that they just passed, which effectively is imposing state control over the rearing of your child in terms of their health care.
Yes.
That is really scary. You, the parents, are not allowed to make any decisions about how your child is treated medically. If somebody at the school or some social worker says, I think this child needs to be given a medication, the child will get the medication. You'll be forced to pay for it, and you've got nothing to say about it. And this is a boon to those prescription antidepressant companies because, 1/4 of the American people on their medications is not enough for these money junkies. They want us all on pills. It's right out of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where everybody is required to take Soma every single day.
And
keep us all happy and tranquilized.
Yeah, I have to wonder with this mandate, is there ever allowed a second opinion with a pediatrician of the parent's choice who may have a different opinion about that kid's needing that drug?
As I haven't read the complete act, and a lot of it's actually written in very general terms yet to be defined and implemented. But I didn't see anything in there that opened the door for parents to come on in and challenge any decisions made by the state regarding the treatment of their children. And don't get me wrong, I love California. I met my lovely wife in California. I worked in the film industry and the space program. Mostly in California, but I would never live there again. They've gone completely nuts.
They have absolutely, in Sacramento, they have absolutely and completely lost their minds. And if I were a parent living in California right now, especially younger kid, I'd move. I'd vote with my feet if it was possible.
One of the reasons it's so expensive for Claire and I to move back to the mainland, which we'd like to do next year, is because we're not going to stop in California. We're going to be heading somewhere over toward middle of the country, Indiana, maybe the Northeast, where I've got family, but not so far north that we get caught in these increasingly brutal winters. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, you had a very interesting story you wanted to share with our listeners.
Well, apparently, the very large Democratic donors are calling for a Clinton campaign post-mortem.
I think she's dead.
Yeah. When Clinton and Kaine greet the very top fundraisers and donors to their failed campaign at New York's Plaza Hotel on Thursday evening, many of them are going to have only one question in mind. Where's the autopsy? The call for a deep and detailed accounting of how Clinton lost the race that she and her donors were absolutely certain she'd win didn't begin immediately after the election because apparently there was too much shock and awe over her defeat by Donald Trump.
No, what it was is they still thought they were going to pull off this electoral college thing and get her in, and now reality is finally sinking in. I'm sure the postmortem is going to be, we didn't register enough dead voters and illegal immigrants. We didn't hack enough of the machines. But, there's a very telling lesson here because this is part of the watershed moment that 2016 is proving to be. Because up until recently, ever since they started taking off the limits on campaign donations, the accepted wisdom has been, he with the most money wins. And Hillary Clinton spent more on her campaign in 2016 than any other president in history. She set the all-time record for money spent. She spent more than twice as much as Donald Trump did and still got trounced.
And I think that ultimately, and I hope in a moment of sang-froid, that the Democratic leadership will look at this. They lost the election first by making it impossible for Bernie Sanders, who could have won against Trump, to get the nomination. And secondly, by providing a candidate who was so terribly flawed, with such baggage and such a history and temperament as to render her absolutely unfit for the White House.
Even Bernie Sanders the other day came out and said she was the least popular candidate in U.S. history, and he's absolutely right. And the arrogance of Hillary and the liberalologists, the Church of Liberalology, and all the backers was, we can overcome all of that. With all of our money and our vote rigging, and we can overcome the real world. And the real world came back and bit them.
And said no.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that as they're licking their wounds, I hope that the Democrats think about. In the next election cycle, 2020, they need someone young, possibly a gal, who is not tarred with the same kind of cesspool corruption that was surrounding Clinton's
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah. I like her a lot. She is local from Hawaii. I respect her. And although I am not a Democrat, I think that this lady is very logical, very intelligent, and very impassioned for the people of her state. And I think that she would make an excellent choice.
Mostly she's opposed to war.
Yeah.
I mean, she's out there introducing the legislation that would make it a crime for the U.S. government to be giving arms and weapons and supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Anyway, there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. We've got a bunch of stuff we need to do this afternoon. Have a really good weekend. We're all waiting to see what happens on Monday. And like I said, I hope that Donald Trump is alive and healthy and smiling on Tuesday morning. So have a good weekend, and aloha, America.